The Mayan colony on Kepler 442b was never meant to be anything special. It was just a small settlement on a cold, rocky world at the edge of human space. 847 people lived there, digging precious minerals from the ground and sending them back to Earth. They had simple lives. They worked hard. They raised families. They never expected to become legends. Sergeant Doan Park stood at the observation window of the security station, watching the sun set behind the distant mountains. He was 53 years old, with gray hair and tired eyes that had seen too many battles. The Frontier Corps had sent him here as a reward for his long service. A quiet posting, they said. Nothing ever happens this far out, they said. He could retire in peace. Dohan took a sip of his cold coffee and looked at the peaceful colony below. Miners walked home from their shifts. Children played in the enclosed gardens. Dr. Yuna Beek was leaving the medical center, probably heading to her small apartment to read before sleep. She was a good doctor, calm and smart. The kind of person you wanted around when things went wrong. Sergeant Park? A young voice called from behind him. Doan turned to see Private Ji Woo Han sitting at her communication station. She was only 22, fresh from training, with bright eyes that still held hope. This was her first real posting. What is it, Private? I'm getting some strange readings from the outer system sensors, Ji Woo said, her fingers moving across her screen. Probably just cosmic interference, but the patterns are weird. Dohan walked over and looked at her display. Numbers and waves danced across the screen. Most people would see nothing but random noise. But Dohan had spent 30 years in the military. He had learned to see patterns where others saw chaos. How long has this been going on? He asked. About 6 hours. I reported it to the main station on the day shift, but they said it was nothing. Dohan studied the patterns more carefully. The signals repeated. They pulsed in groups. They were not random. His stomach began to feel cold. Keep monitoring, he said quietly. Tell me if anything changes. 3 hours later, everything changed. The alarms screamed through the colony like wounded animals. Dohan ran to the command center, his old legs carrying him faster than they had in years. Ji Woo was already there, her face white with fear. What happened? Doan demanded. Ships, Ji Woo whispered. So many ships. The main screen showed the space above their world. Where there had been empty darkness, now there was light. Hundreds of vessels hung in orbit, each one larger than anything humans had ever built. They were black and angular, covered in strange symbols that glowed with purple fire. Get me a count, Dohan ordered. Ji Woo's hand shook as she worked. 300 warships. Transport vessels carrying... Sergeant, the scanners say they're carrying 100,000 soldiers. 100,000. Dohan felt the number hit him like a punch. The colony had 12 armed security personnel. 12 against 100,000. The communication system crackled. A voice came through, deep and cold, translated by the computer into human words. Creatures of this world. We are the Varathi Dominion. We have conquered 200 worlds. We have never been defeated. Your planet now belongs to us. Surrender immediately. Resistance is extinction. You have 1 hour. The message ended. Silence filled the command center. Ji Woo looked at Dohan with tears in her eyes. What do we do? We can't fight them. We can't even slow them down. Dohan did not answer immediately. He walked to the window and looked up at the sky, where alien ships blocked out the stars. He thought about his life, his choices, his regrets. He thought about the 800 people in this colony who trusted him to keep them safe. Then he thought about something else. He thought about human history. The stories his grandmother told him about their ancestors who survived wars, famines, and disasters. The tales of soldiers who stood against impossible odds, not because they could win, but because running was not in their blood. Send a message to Earth, Dahon said finally. Earth is 40 light years away, Jiwoo replied. Even at maximum signal speed, it will take weeks to reach them. Help cannot come in time. Send it anyway. Tell them what happened here. Tell them we did not surrender. Jiwoo stared at him. Sergeant, you can't mean to fight. They have 100,000 soldiers. I can count, Private. Dohan turned to face her. His eyes were hard now, filled with something that Jiwoo had never seen before. It was not hope. It was not courage. It was something older and darker. It was defiance. Call Dr. Beak. Wake up every security officer. Then get on the colony broadcast system. What are you going to say? I'm going to ask for volunteers. 30 minutes later, Dohan stood in the main assembly hall. Every person in the colony had gathered there, from the oldest miner to the youngest child. Fear filled the room like smoke. People held their families close. Some were crying. Dohan stepped onto the small stage. He had never been good with words. He was a soldier, not a speaker. But tonight, words were the only weapons he had. You all heard the message, he began. You know what's coming. I won't lie to you. We cannot defeat them. We cannot escape. Earth is too far away to help us. The crowd made sounds of despair. Parents covered their children's ears. But I'm not going to surrender, Dohun continued. I'm going to fight. Not because I think I can win, but because I am human, and humans do not kneel to anyone. He paused, looking at the frightened faces before him. I'm asking for volunteers. Miners who know explosives. Engineers who know how to build. Anyone who wants to stand beside me. I won't order anyone to fight. This is a choice. But I promise you this, if we stand together, we will make them remember us. We will make them bleed. And maybe, just maybe, we will show the universe what humans are made of. The silence stretched for a long moment. Then an old man stepped forward. Sunho Choi, 68 years old, a retired mining foreman with hands like leather and a back bent from decades of hard work. I've lived a good life, Sunho said. I'd rather die on my feet than live on my knees. I'll fight. One by one, others joined him. Young and old. Men and women. Miners, engineers, teachers, cooks. They stepped forward until nearly half the colony stood with Duhan.Jiwoo watched from the side of the room, tears running down her face. She had never seen anything like this. These were not soldiers. They were ordinary people who had chosen to become something more. Dohon looked at his small army of volunteers. He thought about the 100,000 enemies waiting above. The odds were impossible. The math was hopeless. But as he looked into the determined eyes of his people, Dohan smiled for the first time in years. Well, he said quietly to Jiwoo, they've never met humans before. Elder Turan stood on the command bridge of his flagship, watching the small blue world below. He had conquered 200 planets in his long life. He had crushed species that breathed fire, species that lived in poison, species that could tear metal with their bare claws. None of them had ever given him trouble. The humans would be no different. Report, he commanded, his forearms clasped behind his back. His officer bowed low. The translation of their response has arrived, Elder. They accepted our terms? No, Elder. They refused. Turan turned slowly. His black eyes narrowed. Refused? What do you mean, refused? They sent back a single word. The translation software says it means defiance, or perhaps stubbornness. The exact meaning is unclear. For the first time in decades, Turan felt confused. Every species surrendered when they saw the Dominion fleet. It was the logical choice. Fighting meant death. Surrender meant slavery. Yes, but also survival. All intelligent creatures chose survival. Perhaps they did not understand our message, Turan said. Send it again. Make it clearer. We sent it 5 times, Elder. Their response was the same each time. Turan walked to the viewing screen and studied the human colony. It was so small, so fragile. His sensors showed only 800 life signs. His army could crush them in minutes. Very well, he said finally. If they choose extinction, we will give them extinction. Begin landing operations. Far below on the planet's surface, the humans were not waiting to die. Duhan had divided the volunteers into groups. The miners, led by Sunho, were setting explosive charges throughout the underground tunnel network. The engineers were building barriers and traps. Dr. Yuna was preparing the medical bay for the wounded that would surely come. A teenage girl named Minji Kang ran between the groups, carrying messages and supplies. She was only 16, too young to fight, but too stubborn to hide. Her parents had died in a mining accident 3 years ago. The colony was her only family now. Sergeant Park, Minji called out, sliding to a stop beside Dohon. Sunho says the tunnel charges are ready. He wants to know where you want the first collapse zone. Dohan studied the map on his tablet. The mining tunnels spread under the colony like the roots of a tree. They were narrow, dark, and complicated. Perfect for defense. Tell him Sector 7. That's where they'll try to break through first. We want to funnel them into the smaller passages where their numbers won't matter. Minji nodded and ran off. Dohan watched her go, feeling a mixture of pride and sorrow. Children should not have to live through war. But Minji was human, and humans adapted. They always had. Yuna appeared beside him, her medical bag over her shoulder. I've been reading the old xenobiology files, she said quietly. The ones from the first contact surveys. Find anything useful? Maybe. Yuna pulled out her tablet and showed him a document. The Varathi evolved as apex predators on their home world. They were never prey. They never had to run, hide, or fight against impossible odds. When they encounter a stronger enemy, their instinct is to retreat and regroup, so they don't understand why we're fighting. Exactly. Their brains can't process it. To them, fighting when you can't win is madness. It doesn't compute. Dawn thought about this. Then we use that. We make them confused. We make them doubt. We show them something they've never seen before. The first Varathi landing ships touched down at dawn. They came in waves of silver pods, each one carrying 50 soldiers. The Varathi were tall, nearly 3 meters, with 4 arms and skin like gray stone. They moved with the confidence of creatures who had never known defeat. The first wave marched toward the colony entrance. They expected to find cowering humans waiting to be captured. Instead, they found empty streets and locked doors. Where are they? The squad leader growled to his soldiers. Scan for life signs. Underground, Commander. They're hiding in the tunnels below. Cowards. They run like prey. The squad leader gestured forward. Follow them. Drag them out. The Varathi entered the tunnel system. The passages were dark and narrow, forcing them to move in single file. Their large bodies scraped against the walls. Their weapons were designed for open battlefields, not close combat. They never saw the trap. Sunho watched from the shadows as the enemy soldiers marched past his hiding spot. He counted 50, 60, 70. When he counted 100, he pressed the button on his detonator. The explosion shook the entire tunnel network. Thousands of tons of rock collapsed on the Varathi column. Screams echoed through the darkness, followed by silence. In the command center, Dohan received the report. First contact. Approximately 100 enemy casualties. No human losses. The volunteers around him cheered. Dohan did not. He knew this was only the beginning. They had killed 100 soldiers. 99,900 remained. But something strange was happening on the Vorathi flagship. Elder Turan stared at his tactical display, unable to believe what he was seeing. 100 of his soldiers, dead. Not in battle against a superior force, but killed by an ambush from creatures they outnumbered 100 to 1. "This is impossible," he said. "They were supposed to surrender. The humans collapsed the tunnel on our soldiers," his officer reported. "They buried them alive. Why would they do that? They cannot win. They must know they cannot win." No one had an answer. Turan turned to his science advisor, an old Vorathi with scars from many campaigns. "Tell me about these humans. What are they?" The advisor pulled up data on his screen. "They evolved on a planet called Earth, a harsh world with extreme temperatures, dangerous predators, and constant natural disasters. Their species survived by adapting, cooperating, and persistence." Persistence? They are what their world calls persistence predators. Their ancestors did not defeat their prey through strength or speed. They simply refused to stop chasing until their prey collapsed from exhaustion. They would follow an animal for days, never giving up until it died from the strain. Turan felt something cold move through his chest. They evolved to never give up? It appears so, Elder. Their entire species psychology is built on the concept of endurance. They do not calculate odds the way we do. They do not retreat when the mathematics say they should lose. Then what do? The advisor paused before answering. They keep fighting until they win or they die. There is no middle option. In the tunnels below, Minji ran through the darkness with a message for Dawn. She had seen the explosion, felt the ground shake, heard the alien screams. Her heart was pounding with fear, and something else. Hope. She found Dohun at the second defensive line, organizing the next ambush. "Sergeant, Sunho wants you to know the next trap is ready. He says to tell you that his grandfather fought in a war once. He used to say that you don't need to be stronger than your enemy. You just need to be more stubborn." Dawn smiled at her. "Your grandfather was a wise man. Great-grandfather. And he was. He survived things that should have killed him." He said the secret was simple. Minji's eyes burned with fierce determination. Never, ever give up. Above them, more Vorathi landing ships were descending. Thousands more soldiers would soon enter the tunnels. The odds had not changed, but somewhere in the darkness, 800 humans were waiting, and they had no intention of surrendering. The assault began on the morning of the second day. Elder Turan had learned from his first mistake. He sent 5,000 soldiers into the tunnels, spreading them across every entrance. They carried heavy weapons and thermal scanners. They moved carefully, checking every shadow for traps, but the humans had spent the night preparing. Corporal Hyunsu Lee crouched in a narrow side passage, watching the alien soldiers pass his position. He was 34 years old, thin and quiet, with hands that knew explosives better than anything else. 3 years ago, a mining accident had killed his wife and son. He had nothing left to live for, but he had plenty to die for. When the Vorathi column reached the junction point, Hyunsu pressed his trigger. The ceiling collapsed in a thunder of dust and stone. But this time, instead of one explosion, there were 7. The entire section of tunnel became a death trap, with rocks falling from above and fire erupting from below. Hyunsu did not run. He stepped out of his hiding spot and fired his weapon into the chaos. He killed 3 Vorathi before they even knew he was there. Then he disappeared into the darkness, moving to his next position. This was not a battle. This was a hunt. And the hunters had become the prey. In the medical bay, Yuna worked without rest. The wounded came in a steady stream, carried on stretchers made from mining equipment. Burns, broken bones, cuts from flying rock. She treated them all, her hands moving with calm precision, even as her heart ached with every scream. A young miner named Taiho was brought in with shrapnel wounds across his chest. He was barely conscious, mumbling something over and over. "What's he saying?" Yuna asked as she worked to stop the bleeding. The man carrying Taiho leaned close to listen. "He's saying, did we get them? He wants to know if his trap worked." Yuna closed her eyes for a moment. Even dying, this man cared more about the mission than himself. This was what it meant to be human. This was why they would never surrender. "Tell him yes," she said softly. "Tell him he got them." Above ground, the Varathi commanders were losing their minds. Report after report came in with the same impossible news. Ambush in Sector 3. Trap in Sector 7. Explosion in Sector 12. The humans were everywhere and nowhere. They struck without warning and vanished like ghost dot by the end of the second day. The Varathi had lost 2,000 soldiers. The humans had lost 20-3. Elder Turan stood in his command center, surrounded by confused officers. The tactical displays showed a mess of red markers where his soldiers had fallen. The pattern made no sense. The humans should have formed a defensive line. They should have tried to hold territory. That's what every other species did. Instead, they were playing a different game entirely. They're not trying to hold ground, Turan realized. They're trying to kill as many of us as possible. They don't care about winning. They just want to hurt us. That's insane, his second officer said. What purpose does that serve? I don't know. But we must adapt. Turan studied the display. Send in the war beasts. Clear the tunnels with fire. If they want to die, we'll help them. The third day brought new horrors. The Varathi war beasts were massive creatures, bred for tunnel warfare. They breathed fire and had armored skin that could stop bullets. They filled the passages with flame, burning everything in their path. The humans fell back. For the first time, their ambush failed. The fire was too hot, too fast. People burned. Screams echoed through the tunnels. Duhan gathered his remaining fighters at the central hub, deep underground. They had lost nearly 100 people. Their ammunition was running low. The enemy had found a way to counter their tactics. "We need a new plan," Jiwoo said, her voice hoarse from smoke. "The fire beasts are pushing through Sector 5. We'll be surrounded in 6 hours." Doan looked at his exhausted team. Sunho was bleeding from a wound on his arm, but refused treatment. Minji was covered in dust and ash. Yimsu was reloading his weapon with steady hands. None of them suggested surrender. "The beasts need air to make fire," Dahun said slowly, thinking out loud. "What if we take away their air?" Sunho's eyes lit up. The emergency seal system. If we close the blast doors and vent the atmosphere in Sector 5, anything in there dies, including the beasts. We'd lose that entire section of the tunnel, and anyone still inside. "I'll stay," Hinsu said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. "I'll lure them deep into the sector, then seal myself in with them. Someone needs to close the doors manually from inside." "You'll die," Yuna said. "I know." Yunsu smiled for the first time since his family died. "But I'll take those monsters with me." Seemed like a fair trade. No one tried to talk him out of it. They understood. Sometimes love meant sacrifice. Sometimes the best way to protect the living was to join the dead. 2 hours later, the blast doors in Sector 5 sealed shut. Yunsu stood alone in the darkness, surrounded by 8 war beasts and 300 Varathi soldiers. He held the override switch in his hand. "For my wife," he whispered. "For my son." He pressed the button. The air screamed out of the sector through the emergency vents. The war beasts roared as their fire died. The Varathi soldiers clawed at their throats as the vacuum took hold. Hyunsu watched them fall, one by one, until his own lungs gave out. He died smiling in the medical bay. Yoonbi Shin felt her baby kick. She was 7 months pregnant, but she had refused to hide in the emergency shelter. Instead, she carried ammunition between positions, crawling through tunnels too small for the Varathi to follow. Her husband had died on the first day, killed by falling rock during an explosion. She had cried for 1 hour. Then she had dried her tears and gotten back to work. Her baby needed a world to be born into. If that meant fighting while pregnant, then she would fight while pregnant. "You should rest," Yuna told her during a brief quiet moment. "The stress isn't good for the baby." Yoonbi shook her head. "The stress of slavery would be worse. My daughter will be born free, even if I have to carry grenades to make that happen." On the 4th day, Minji was captured. She had been running a message through a collapsed section when a Varathi patrol found her. They grabbed her with their massive hands and dragged her to their commander, expecting her to beg for mercy. Instead, she spat in his face. The commander stared at her, confused. This small creature, this child, should have been terrified. She should have been crying, pleading, offering information in exchange for her life. That's what prisoners did. That's what prey did. But Minji was not prey. She was human. "Kill me if you want," she said, her voice steady. "But know this. You will never break us. You will never own us. And we will never ever stop fighting you." The Varathi soldiers looked at each other. Something strange was happening in their minds. It was small at first, just a tiny seed of doubt. But it was growing. Duhan came for her that night. He led 7 fighters through enemy lines, moving silent as shadows. They found Minji in a holding cell, guarded by 30 Varathi. The math said it was impossible. 7 against 30. The fight lasted 3 minutes. When it was over, 28 Varathi lay dead. Dohun carried Minji out of the camp, his own blood dripping from a dozen wounds. Behind him, 2 of his fighters stayed to hold the retreat. They died fighting, giving the others time to escape. Elder Turan received the report in silence. His officers waited for his response, but none came. The elder simply stared at the numbers on his screen. 8,000 soldiers dead. 8,000, against a handful of humans with mining equipment and stubbornness. For the first time in his long life, Turan felt something new. It started in his chest and spread through his body like ice water. It was fear. The Varathi High Command was not pleased. A transmission came from the home world on the 5th day, demanding answers. How could 100,000 of the Dominion's finest soldiers fail to capture 800 primitives? How could 8,000 warriors die against creatures with no real weapons, no warships, no military training? Elder Turan had no good answers. He sat alone in his quarters, staring at captured human datapads. His science team had translated the contents. Now, Turan was reading, trying to understand the enemy he faced. The files contained history. Human history. Stories of war and survival that stretched back thousands of years. He read about a place called Thermopylae, where 300 warriors held off an army of millions. He read about a city called Stalingrad, where soldiers fought house by house, room by room, dying by the thousands, but never retreating. He read about something called the Alamo, where a small group of fighters chose death over surrender and became legends. The pattern was clear. Throughout their entire existence, humans had faced impossible odds. They had been outnumbered, outgunned, surrounded. And they had fought anyway. What are these creatures? Turan whispered to the empty room. His science advisor had prepared a report. Turan read it 3 times, trying to make it fit in his mind. Humans evolved on a death world. Their planet tried to kill them constantly with earthquakes, volcanoes, ice ages, and plagues. 99% of all species that ever lived on Earth went extinct. But humans survived. They survived because they refused to accept defeat. Their psychology was built on something the Varathi could not understand. Humans did not calculate the odds of survival before fighting. They did not weigh the costs and benefits of resistance. They simply fought. It was automatic. It was instinct, and there was something else. Something that confused Tehran even more. Humans fought not just for themselves, but for each other. They sacrificed their own lives to protect strangers. They ran into danger to save people they had never met. This made no logical sense. In Varathi society, the weak were abandoned. Resources were not wasted on those who could not contribute, but humans were different. They carried their wounded. They fed their elderly. They protected their children, even when it meant their own death. Tehran closed his eyes. He was beginning to understand why his soldiers were dying. The humans were not fighting to survive. They were fighting for something bigger than survival. They were fighting for each other, and that made them more dangerous than any enemy the Dominion had ever faced. In the tunnels below, Sun Ho Choi knew his time was coming. He was 68 years old, and his body was failing. The wound on his arm had become infected. He could feel the fever spreading through his blood. Yuna had done her best, but antibiotics were running low. "You should rest," Yuna told him. "Let the younger fighters handle the next shift." Sun Ho shook his head. "I've rested enough in my life. I spent 40 years digging rocks out of the ground. Now I get to do something that matters." He gathered a group of 10 volunteers, all older miners like himself. Men and women who had lived full lives and had nothing left to lose. They called themselves the Grey Guard. "The young ones need to survive," Sun Ho told them. "They need to keep fighting after we're gone. Our job is to buy them time. Our job is to show the enemy that humans never give up, no matter how old we get." The Grey Guard took position at the narrowest point of the tunnel network. When the next Varathi assault came, they were waiting. The battle lasted 6 hours. Sun Ho fought with a mining pick in one hand and a pistol in the other. He was not fast. He was not strong. But he was stubborn. Every time an enemy knocked him down, he got back up. Every time they pushed him back, he pushed forward. One by one, his companions fell around him. But they died standing. They died fighting. They died human. When the Varathi finally broke through, only Sun Ho remained. He was on his knees, bleeding from wounds he could no longer count. But his eyes were still burning with defiance. A Varathi officer stood over him, weapon raised. "Why do you keep fighting? You have lost. Your friends are dead. Why won't you surrender?" Sun Ho smiled, blood staining his teeth. "Because surrender is not in our nature. Because we would rather die free than live as slaves. Because when my grandchildren ask what I did in the war, I want them to know that I stood and fought." He raised his mining pick one final time. The Varathi shot him before he could swing, but the story spread. The Varathi soldiers who witnessed his death told others. The tale of the old man who refused to kneel traveled through the entire army like a disease, and doubt began to grow. Meanwhile, Jiwoo's message had finally reached human space. A cargo ship called the Morning Star picked up the transmission while passing through a nearby system. The captain listened to Jiwoo's desperate recording, her voice shaking as she described the invasion, the odds, the choice they had made to fight. "We are outnumbered 100 to 1. We cannot win, but we will not surrender. If anyone hears this, know that humans stood here. Know that we did not kneel." The captain sent the message to every ship in range. Within hours, it had reached Earth. The response was immediate. Admiral Young Ho Kang stood before the emergency council, his uniform crisp and his voice cold with anger. 800 of our people are fighting for their lives against impossible odds. They've held for 5 days. 5 days against 100,000 enemies. They've killed 8,000 of them with mining equipment and courage. What can we do? A council member asked. The colony is 40 light years away. Our nearest fleet is weeks from reaching them. Then we burn the engines until they melt. We push our ships until they break. We get there as fast as possible, and we bring enough firepower to make the Varathi regret ever hearing the word human. The council voted unanimously. The entire Third Fleet mobilized within the hour. Admiral Kang sent one final message ahead, knowing the Varathi would intercept it. He wanted them to hear it. To the Varathi forces at Kepler 442b, you have attacked our people. You have killed our brothers and sisters. This was a mistake. We are coming. Hold the line, survivors. We're bringing hell with us. In the tunnels, the humans heard the message through Jiwoo's communication system. For the first time in 5 days, they cheered. But the battle was not over yet. Yuna had done something unexpected. A wounded Varathi soldier had been left behind during a retreat. Standard practice was to kill any enemy found alive. But Yuna was a doctor, and doctors did not kill. She treated his wounds. The Varathi soldier was confused. In his culture, the weak were abandoned. An enemy would certainly be left to die. But this human woman was saving his life. Why? Because that's what we do, Yuna explained gently. We take care of the sick and wounded. Even enemies. Even people we hate. Because if we stop being compassionate, we stop being human. The soldier stared at her with his strange black eyes. Something changed in his expression. It was not understanding, but it was the beginning of something. Doubt. If these creatures were savage primitives, why did they show mercy? If they were mindless fighters, why did they care for their enemy? The Varathi soldier did not have answers, but he was starting to wonder if everything he had been told about humans was wrong. On the 6th day, Elder Tehran received word of the approaching human fleet. His options were becoming limited. He could retreat and report his failure to the High Command. This would mean disgrace and possibly execution, or he could destroy the humans before reinforcements arrived. Prove that the Dominion was still superior. Prove that his 8,000 dead soldiers had not died for nothing. Tehran chose to fight. He ordered every remaining soldier into the tunnels. No more tactics. No more strategy. Just overwhelming force. Kill them all, he commanded, before their fleet arrives. Leave nothing alive. The final assault was about to begin. The 7th day dawned with fire and blood. Elder Tehran sent his entire remaining army into the tunnels. 90,000 soldiers poured through every entrance like a flood of death. They did not stop for traps. They did not pause for ambush. They simply marched forward, accepting losses, crushing everything in their path. The humans fell back. Dohan gathered his surviving fighters at the central chamber, the deepest part of the mine. 200 people remained, including civilians who had picked up weapons from the fallen. They were exhausted, wounded, running low on ammunition. We can't hold them, Jiwoo said, her voice hollow. There are too many. Dohan looked at his people. Miners, engineers, doctors, teachers. Ordinary humans who had become warriors. They had held for 7 days against impossible odds. They had killed over 10,000 enemies. They had shown the universe what humans were made of. Now it was time for the final choice. The main shaft, Dohan said slowly. If we collapse it, we bury this entire section. Including us. Including them. Silence filled the chamber. Everyone understood what he was saying. We can trigger the emergency charges, an engineer named Dongwook said. It would take down half the mountain. Nothing would survive. No. Yuna's voice cut through the darkness. She was standing at the entrance to the medical bay, her face pale but determined. We are not dying today. Not all of us." She stepped aside, revealing what was behind her. Umbi was lying on a medical bed, her face twisted with pain. Her water had broken 2 hours ago. The baby was coming. "A new life," Una said. "Born during war. Born during our darkest hour. We have to protect her. We have to survive long enough for her to take her first breath." Doan closed his eyes. A baby, of course. Because the universe had a sense of irony. "How long?" he asked. "An hour. Maybe 2. The baby is coming fast." Doan turned to his fighters. "We hold for 2 hours. Whatever it takes. We hold until that baby is born. Then we collapse the shaft." No one argued. No one complained. They simply checked their weapons and moved to their positions. The Varathi hit them like a wave. The fighting was brutal. Close quarters. Hand to hand. Humans died, but they took enemies with them. Every inch of ground was paid for in blood on both sides. Minji fought beside Doan, her small body moving through the chaos. She had lost her fear days ago. Now she felt only cold determination. These aliens had taken everything from her. Her home, her friends, her childhood. She would make them pay for every loss. Jiwoo had abandoned her communication station and picked up a fallen rifle. She was no soldier, but she was human. And humans did not hide while others fought. The minutes stretched into eternities. 1 hour passed. Then another dot in the medical bay. Yumbi screamed as the final contractions hit. Yuna worked with steady hands, guiding the baby into the world even as explosions shook the walls. And then, in the middle of war, in the middle of death, a new sound filled the chamber. A baby's cry. Yuna held up the newborn, a tiny girl with dark hair and strong lungs. "She's healthy," Yuna whispered, tears streaming down her face. "She's perfect." Yumbi reached out with trembling hands and took her daughter. For a moment, the war faded away. There was only a mother and her child, connected by love in a world of hate. "Hannah," Yumbi said softly. "Her name is Hannah. It means hope." The message spread through the defensive lines. A baby had been born. Life had won, even in the shadow of death. The fighters redoubled their efforts, finding strength they didn't know they had. But the Varathi were too many. The final barricade fell. Dohan prepared to trigger the collapse charges. At least they would take the enemy with them. At least baby Hannah would never be a slave. Then the sky exploded with light. The UESC, Indomitable, burst out of fold space directly above the planet. It was a battleship, 3 kilometers long, bristling with weapons that could crack continents. Behind it came the rest of the Third Fleet, 40 warships, thousands of fighters. The full might of human military power. Admiral Kang's voice boomed through every communication channel. "Attention Varathi forces. You have 1 minute to withdraw from the planet's surface. Any enemy vessel that remains will be destroyed." This is not a negotiation. The Varathi in orbit hesitated. Their commanders looked to Elder Tehran for guidance. But Tehran was no longer listening to reason. His pride had been wounded. His soldiers had been slaughtered. He would not retreat now. "Ignore them," he ordered. "Finish the humans below. Kill them all." It was his last mistake. The Indomitable opened fire. The first shot vaporized the Varathi cruiser. The second destroyed their command station. The third, fourth, and fifth wiped out their landing ships. Within minutes, the Varathi fleet was burning. Scattered wreckage falling through the atmosphere like dying stars. Drop pods rained down from the human fleet. Marines in powered armor crashed into the planet's surface and stormed the tunnel entrances. They met the Varathi army that was still trying to reach the human survivors. The battle that followed was not a fight. It was a slaughter. The Varathi soldiers, already shaken by 7 days of unexpected losses, broke completely. They fled back through the tunnels, trying to reach their remaining ships. But the human marines cut them off, surrounded them, destroyed them. Elder Turan was found in his command center, surrounded by the bodies of his guards. He had not fled. He had waited, watching his entire army collapse around him. Admiral Kang stood before him, rifle raised. Surrender. Turan looked at him with exhausted eyes. I have conquered 200 worlds. I have never been defeated. How did this happen? How did 800 primitives destroy my army? Kang smiled coldly. Because we're not primitives. We're humans. And humans don't know how to quit. He lowered his rifle. Take him to the ship. He'll stand trial on Earth. In the tunnels below, the survivors emerged into daylight for the first time in 7 days. Dohun carried baby Hana in his arms, shielding her eyes from the sun. He was wounded in a dozen places, barely able to stand. But he was alive. They were alive. 435 people had died, more than half the colony. But 412 survived, including one newborn girl who had entered the world during humanity's darkest hour. The Marines saluted as they passed. Word had spread through the fleet about what happened here. These miners, these ordinary people, had done the impossible. They had held against an enemy that outnumbered them 100 to 1. They had killed over 10,000 soldiers. They had refused to surrender. They had become legends. 10 years later, Kepler 442b had changed. The small mining colony had become a major settlement. 100,000 humans lived there now, building cities and raising families on the world their ancestors had defended. The Vorathi, Dominion, had signed a peace treaty with humanity. It was the first time in their history they had made peace with a species they failed to conquer. The terms were simple. No more attacks. No more invasions. Mutual respect. Other alien species watched the treaty signing with interest. They had heard the stories. They knew what had happened on Kepler 442b. A new word had spread through their languages. A word that had no direct translation, but carried a simple meaning. Do not provoke the humans. Minji Kang, now 26 years old, stood at the memorial on the mountainside. She wore the uniform of the Frontier Corps, the same military that Dohan had served. Behind her, a class of young cadets waited in respectful silence. The memorial was carved from the same rock that the miners had once dug for precious metals. It bore 435 names. Sun Ho Choi, Hyun Soo Lee, Dongwook, Kim, all the others who had given their lives. The inscription at the base read simply, they came with 100,000. They faced 859 humans. They learned what we are. A small girl approached the memorial, carrying flowers. She was 10 years old, with dark hair and bright eyes. Her name was Hannah. Is this where Grandpa Sunho is? She asked. Minji nodded. Yes, this is where all our heroes rest. Hannah placed the flowers at the base of the memorial. She stood there for a moment, looking at the names, trying to understand the weight of what they meant. Mom says he died so I could be born free, Hannah said quietly. That's right. He died so all of us could be free. Hannah touched the carved stone with her small hand. I'll make him proud, she said. I'll make all of them proud. Minji smiled, feeling tears prick her eyes. This was why they had fought. This was why they had died. Not for themselves, but for the children who would come after. For the future that humans would build among the stars. She turned to address the cadets behind her. Let this place remind you of who we are. We are humans. We adapt. We endure. We never surrender. No matter the odds, no matter the enemy, we fight for each other. She looked back at the memorial one final time, remembering the old man who had taught her what courage meant. And we never, ever give up. Far above, the stars shone bright and cold. A million worlds waited in the darkness, filled with species who had heard the stories, who had learned the lesson. Humanity was no longer alone in the universe, but they had proven something that would echo through history. They were not prey. They were humans, and they would never kneel.